Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast, where we teach clients how to build wealth and create passive income without the risk of Wall Street.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Cameron. Looking forward to this as we're diving deeper into Nelson's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. And you want to know where we're at in the book, Cameron?
I know where we're at, Anthony.
No, we are in, and let me finish before you start jumping to conclusions. We're in the wax on, wax off portion.
Oh,
right?
Little Karate Kid.
Yeah, exactly. The Karate
Kid.
Kid. Like if you remember the Karate Kid, I think you were probably like 3 when it came out.
Nope, huge fan.
You know, at the beginning, he wants to learn how to do karate, but Mr. Miyagi is making him wax the cars and sweep the floor. And then he's getting frustrated. Well, I want to just learn how to do karate. And then finally Miyagi puts it all together and says, okay, show me wax on. And he throws a punch at him and he blocks it, right? We're almost there to the end we're almost to that critical scene of the movie or the book. Like right now, some people may get frustrated because we're halfway through the book and we haven't really talked much about life, you know, how to actually use this. But Nelson, the only way IBC will not work is if you don't follow the program. Mm. And that's why he's taken so much time to incorporate the human factors. And that's what we're going to talk about today are these 4 or they're 5 human factors. And in order to do this properly, you need to understand these and be able to overcome these human factors. And that's what we're talking about today. And also, as you know, I started watching Cobra Kai, right? Which if you haven't watched Cobra Kai, if you are a fan of Karate Kid or were, Cobra Kai, you're going to love Cobra Kai. It's like the same characters, actually the same actors. Instead of them being 16, they're now like 40. And they have some families, and then they're still that arch rival. So I just finished season 2 and waiting for the next one. So I just want to throw that out there. We're almost there to like the All Valley tournament. Right?
Ooh, so good.
Yeah.
So
right
good.
Now, we're still doing some training. We're in Mr. Miyagi's sweet backyard working and learning, but soon we're going to show you how to put this in place. And that actually reminds me, if you've been following this podcast or watching us on YouTube or Facebook, and if you're ever wondering, well, these policies sounds cool, or will they work, or will they work for me, or how do I get one? If you look in our show notes, there will be a link to schedule a 15-minute call with Cameron or I, and we're just kind of talk about what your goals are and whether this is for you, and see if we should move forward or not.
And if you call Anthony, he'll talk for 15 minutes about Cobra Kai.
Yeah, do not bring up Cobra Kai when we're on the call.
I'll add here before we jump in is that you and I both have done this over the years, but we've read this book numerous times. And every time I go back and I read it, I learn something else. And this is probably the section of the book that I always learn something, right? Is you learn in layers, and every time there's just a level of understanding that you gain when you go back and reread it. And this is for the section for me. These are human factors. And so I probably learn more about kind of myself when I'm reading this book than anything, and it's this section right here. So I love this part. So.
Well, Cameron, why don't you share, was there one little tidbit that stood out that after you've probably read this many times, give us an example of one thing that stood out for you this time?
Yeah, there's 5 factors in here, and I probably identify with all of them, right, to be totally honest. But the first one, let's jump right into. Okay, Mr. Arrival Syndrome. We'll get to you in a minute. Let's jump right into Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law is the way that it's defined in the book is work expands to meet the time allowed. And I got to tell you, I'm absolutely guilty of this. I've been guilty of this for as long as I can remember. I remember in high school and in college, man, if I had a paper that was due right at the end of the month, I wasn't starting that thing till the last week, a few days before. And unfortunately, I kind of pride myself in kind of being able to get things done at those last minute deadlines, right? Is putting it off. And I pulled many, start working on those things in the afternoons, and pulled many all-nighters just trying to make sure I hit those deadlines. So Parkinson's law, I absolutely identify with.
Yeah, Parkinson's law for me, this one is the hardest one for me to conquer. And one thing I noticed, just even in my day, if I have, say I have 5 or 6 appointments back to back, man, I'm in the zone. I am just driven, and I'm just performing and being very efficient. But if I have 2 appointments, particularly if they're spread out, or maybe, on Fridays I try to do an admin day, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do all these things on my admin day. But then when I get there, I don't. I have that tendency to do things that I want, that aren't important, but something that I like doing. And sometimes you put off those important and urgent things to do something that you enjoy doing. And that's something that I struggle with. And where I've seen with my clients, a lot of times, let's just compare this to work expands or to your lifespan. A lot of times when we're 20, 30 years old, we're like, man, I got plenty of time to start saving and start creating passive income. The next thing you know, you're 40 or 50 years old, and you're like, oh, shoot. I wish I would have saved more, or I wish I would have started investing more. And, this IBC works really no matter how old you are. However, the earlier you start, the better.
And this Parkinson's law can also kind of apply to the saying that a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. And you had just kind of mentioned, looking over your lifespan and saving when you're 20, 30 years old. And what came to my mind was, I've had this conversation many times with kind of some of my younger clients that might be, mid 20s, early 30s, and we're talking about cars and purchasing cars. Mm-hmm. And they'll come in here, and I'm not here to tell people what to do by any means, right? I just kind of show them the way on how to finance it or whatever they want to do. But there's conversations that we have just on personal finance, and I'm thinking of one couple in particular that we talk probably monthly, right? We check in once a month, and we talk about their spending habits and those things, and just try to keep them on track. And I love these guys to death. And one time the husband came in, and he's late 20s-ish, right? And he comes in, he wants to buy a truck.
That sounds like my son.
This truck, he comes in, I'm like, great, man, tell me about it, right? This truck is almost $60,000. And I'm like, oh, man, right? So I'm trying to think of, right, how to share a story to educate somebody, or share some sort of parable, right? But I always come back to Parkinson's law in this scenario, is because a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. And the way that I frame this is I say, okay, listen, if you're 25 years old right now and you go out and you buy a $60,000 truck, that's fine, right? But you're never going to go back and buy a $20,000 or $25,000 car. You have just raised the bar, or your baseline, for comparison of every car moving forward up to a $50,000, $60,000 truck that has got the seat warmers, right? And here in Vegas,
seat warmers,
here in Vegas, it's got the seat coolers, right? So they'll cool you down as well. And then it's also got the steering wheel that'll get cool too. So, right, I mean, that's the idea of a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Is you're once you experience that becomes the norm for you now.
And just to tag on to that, particularly in regards to cars, when I was looking, Cameron, you know me, I'm not a car guy. Or am I handy? And there's a lot of things that I'm not.
There's a lot of things you're not.
But cars really don't really excite me. I mean, but there was one car I had that I absolutely loved, and it was an FJ Cruiser by Toyota. Remember those?
I do.
Right. The first time I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, "What is that? That thing looks super cool." And I ended up getting it. make a long story short, I ended up rolling it as well with the family in it.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, wait a minute. We don't have to make that story short. We can come back to that and unpack it if you want to.
Well, no.
Maybe that'll be a different one.
Yeah, but what I will say, the car worked, man. We rolled over 1.25 times.
That's scary.
And everybody walked out with, well, maybe a little scratch from the window, but everybody was fine. And then when I was looking at cars, I really liked the Range Rover. That was my dream car, and I almost got it, but man, that is just way too much money to spend on a car. I'm thinking I could spend half that and then take other money by rental property. So I didn't get the Range Rover. I'm like, you know what? That FJ Cruiser I liked. Why don't I get another one? And this is embarrassing to say, but you want to know the reason why I didn't get the FJ Cruiser?
They didn't have it in pink?
Oh. No, you can get them in pink, man. The door, the locking system on the doors and the ignition switch. The cars I've had before, since the FJ Cruiser, they have the keyless entry.
Oh,
right? Yeah. So with the FJ Cruiser, you have to actually take the keys out of your pocket and put it in the door, open it up, and then you have to put them in the ignition to start it. But the cars that I've had since then have that keyless entry. Like the one I have before, there was like a button on the handle. You have to hit that button to unlock it. But now you don't even have to hit the button. You just got to walk up to it and pull the handle, and it opens up. And you walk in and push that button. The whole time the keys are in your pocket. The moral of this story is maybe I'm a little high maintenance, okay? But I enjoyed that luxury of the convenience of the keyless entry. And so now I'm not going to get a car unless it has a keyless entry.
Right? Absolutely. One thing I'll add in there on page 28 when he's talking about Parkinson's law is he says, if you can whip Parkinson's law, you will win by default because your peers cannot do this. And everything that we do is compared with everyone else. When I read everything you do is compared with everyone else is, I don't read it that I'm comparing myself to you because you're much older than me. How I read that is that I compare it with my peer group. Is I compare myself and my model of what I'm doing financially with every other individual that's my age, and I try to analyze and ask myself time and time again, am I being the absolute most efficient with my resources that I possibly can? And so I don't compare myself to somebody that's 5 years, 10 years older than me, that may be very much more successful than I am. I do compare myself to others in my age group and see where I'm at. And I don't know, I just wanted to share that.
Well, you know, when you say that, Cameron, to me, it reminds me of the old saying, keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
And I know that you don't do that, but can you expand on that how you're comparing what you're doing of not trying to keep up?
Really good question. Is I'm not trying to keep up on consumption, right? Is I'm not trying to purchase a whole bunch of stuff that I don't need, conspicuous consumption, those things. Is I look at my plan is I'm in this for the long game, right? I'm not trying to go and retire in 10 years, in 15 years. Is my mentality on what I'm trying to do is I am cultivating a skill set that is only going to get better in 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. And it'd be ridiculous for me to think that I'm going to back out of this career when I'm in 15 years from now, 20 years from now. I'm going to be a way better advisor at that point than I ever would be, or that I am today. And so I'm not sure how to answer that, but I'm in this for the long game. I'm in this to cultivate a skill set that's going to provide for me and my family for a very long time. But then also the model that I'm building by using the infinite banking strategy is a model that's going to provide for me way past retirement, but then also provide for my kids and also provide for my children's children. Right. And so the word that comes back to me is just long game. This is not about getting to retirement and stopping and hitting cruise control. Is I am building, I'm putting a model in place that can be perpetuated for myself and for my kids.
Let me add something talking about you, Cameron, just to clarify. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression, because again, when I first heard that, I'm thinking of you competing up to the Joneses, and even if you're comparing yourselves to other people in your young age, your priorities are not the norm of this world or of this country. Like you're a big family man, and you prioritize more time with the family than you do making money. So I just want to make sure that that's clear as far as when you are comparing it. Like I know you very well, and that's why I respect you. Ooh, did I say that? Okay, I'm going to edit that out. I'm going to edit that out. But you brought up a very good point, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and let's jump right into kind of the second human factor. What do you think?
Well, did we go through expenses rise equal income?
Oh, I don't think we did.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things he talked about with Parkinson's law, well, and just to clarify, if you haven't read the book, if you haven't, I would highly suggest that you do read the book. And we're going to have a link in the show notes for you to buy it on Amazon. But Parkinson's law was actually a book written by...
Do you need your readers?
No, I have mine on. Northcote Parkinson. So it has nothing to do with the devastating disease. It's actually a author of a book. And he talked about some of these human laws. And one of them he talked about is expenses rise to income. And like, I remember this when I graduated college of just, man, now that I have a career and I have like a real job, I'm going to be loaded. I've never made this amount of money, right? Now looking at that amount of money, my lifestyle is much more than what it was when somebody coming right out of college. And we have that tendency that as soon as we get that raise, well, maybe the next car we're looking at is a little bit nicer. Maybe the vacations we go to, instead of going to Disneyland, maybe we're going to Cancun, or just we just start increasing our expenses to meet our income. And the problem is when we do that, we're never going to get ahead. It's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. And that's one of the things that he's talked about. And to be honest, I've struggled with that as well. And even being a business owner where your income fluctuates. Like what I've done, and I tell a lot of my clients where their income is up and down, is, you live off a certain amount of money each month, and then anything extra you save. Either you save it in reserves for a rainy day, or you reinvest in your corporation, or maybe you use some of that extra money for extra trips. But we need to be good stewards of our money. And when we start making more, that doesn't mean that we should be spending more.
Really good point. We've kind of done a really good job here, but I do want to add, I literally just thought of a story. I remember when I was going to school in high school, and I just graduated. I was going to work for UPS. I remember getting that first paycheck, and I remember standing in the living room, and I opened it up and I looked at it, and it was a couple $100, right, for a week's worth of work. And I remember sitting there, and the first thing that a family member said to me was, "Hey, if you took that money and or if you took that paycheck every week or one of those a month, you could go buy a new car." And that was like the first thing that was told to me. So what did I do? I went and bought a new car. It wasn't new by any means, but it's new to me, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just the mindset again. When we're talking about learning, right? Where are we learning? Where are we getting our financial education from? Is it lateral, right, for people around us that may not be the best off, or are we looking at somebody that's been there, done that?
So the next law Nelson talks about is, he calls it Willie Sutton law. Willie Sutton was a notorious bank robber, and he was asked this question, "Willie, why do you rob banks?" And he said, that's where they keep the money. The point of this law, what Nelson is taking, is that wherever money resides, somebody is going to want to take it. And what he discusses mostly is regarding to the government and the IRS. And he explained it this way, which I thought was a pretty unique way. is that if I went into the mall and I held a gun up to somebody and I said, give me all your money, everybody around there is going to call me a thief, that I am taking that person's money. But if I went to the mall an hour earlier and I talked with everybody who was there, I said, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to pull the gun out and I'm going to empty out his wallet, and then I'm going to give a little bit to each one of you. Would they still call me a thief? Or what Nelson says, that's what they call democracy. And I think what Nelson is trying to make a point of is that you need to be, you worked hard for that money. And one of the biggest eroders of wealth is going to be taxes. So we need to have a plan and a strategy to minimize the impact that taxes are going to have on your wealth.
What I'll add to that right there is what comes to mind when I think of Willie Sutton's law is, right, wherever you have wealth, is somebody's going to try to come and steal it, right, and take it from you. But also it's when you put money somewhere on deposit, is you're entering into an agreement with who's holding that money. And most qualified plans, right, from a 30,000 foot level is, right, there's some of my money that's in there, and then there's some of the money that I just haven't chosen to pay the IRS yet. And when I enter into that type of agreement, where does all the control lie over that account, Anthony? Is that with me, or is that with somebody else dictating it to me?
It's with somebody else, including the government.
Right? And what they do, right, and this, again, my perspective, is what they do is they will put money on it. They will put money on deposit. They will put restrictions on you getting that money, and then they create exceptions, right? So, hey, you can have your money in a 401k and IRA if you meet some of these types of criteria. And when I look at the option of the route that I've chosen of keeping my money on deposit with insurance companies and high cash value life insurance, is who owns, Anthony, you know this, who dictates the control of that money?
You do.
I do, right? When you look at a contract, right, that's laid out in that policy, is I'm number one. I'm the guy that's making the calls on the premiums that go in there, on the loan repayment schedules, the access to money. I call them up and I tell them to send me my money. They don't ask any questions. They just say, how quickly do you want it? Right? So there's a whole different element of control between these two things. And my personality type is I have no interest in playing that game of kind of playing by their rules. Is I like to have my money on deposit over here, and I like to have access to it whenever I need it.
Right. And Nelson talks about the government was, the IRS was not even around, or income tax was not even around until 1913. The government did not have a national debt. They were still doing well, but now all of a sudden they start taxing, and you know what? It is never enough. And Nelson talks about how the government created a problem with these high taxes, and then they try to create a solution with an IRA or 401k. And that creates even more problems because the government is in control of when you can access that money and how much you can put in. And I'm sure we'll do a podcast specifically on the pros and cons of qualified plans. And qualified plans are like an IRA or 401k. But when I talk to somebody about what their goals are, when you dive deep, their goal isn't to be a millionaire, or they may think that's the goal at the beginning, but really what their goal is to create cash flow. And so if that's truly your goal, is to create cash flow and ideally passive income, then we need to make financial decisions that are going to help you achieve those goals. And a qualified plan is not a great place to create passive income.
Agreed 100%. What you mentioned in there was kind of the problem is taxation, right, that they created. And so we've got 2 upcoming podcasts that are going to be addressing these 2 scenarios. So upcoming, these are going to be really, really good. You guys are going to want to make sure that you subscribe and listen to these. But we've got a gentleman, Todd Martis, from Capital Preservation Services that we're going to be interviewing shortly. Anthony, do you want to share anything on Capital Preservation Services briefly?
I'm real excited about having Todd on here. I've actually flown out to his office and have met with him and his wife and been to his house. And what he's going to share, and we'll go more into it when he's there, but I'll just kind of give you maybe a little teaser. There's things that CPAs know, but they don't know the whole picture. And I can say that because Todd explained some strategies to me that I thought I knew how they worked. I'm like, you know what? That really does not make sense, or is not going to be a big advantage. But Todd showed me a different way to look at it, and a different strategy to use maximize the tax code, the current laws, to lower the taxes. So he's gonna be a wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited for him to be joining our podcast.
And thank you, Anthony. And the second gentleman that I was referencing is when you're talking about the current tax code. When we're talking about the current tax code, and where the tax code needs to go, or potentially will be going, is we've got a gentleman by the name of David McKnight, which I've been a big fan of this gentleman for several years now. He wrote a book that's called The Power of Zero. He also produced a movie that's called The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. And I think we're going to have some of those materials available for our listeners. And if you guys want some of that, you guys need to read this, get into it, read the book, watch the video prior to him coming on, and we can ask questions on your behalf. We've got a bunch of our questions that we're going to be asking him, but I am really, really excited about having David McKnight on the show.
I've watched The Tax Train a few times, and man, he does a very good job. And what he talks about is the situation of where we're at with our national debt and how we got here. One of the interesting things I thought, everybody focuses on the tax rate, right? Of taxes, or cutting taxes, or increasing taxes. But if you really look at the IRS, well, the government, maybe a business isn't the right example because they're not really generating money, they're actually taking it. But if you just look at their profit and loss statement, they have money coming in, which is part of it, and that's an important piece. But there's also money going out, which is just as important. Similar to what we talked about in regards to Parkinson's law, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. The same thing goes for the government. We spend so much time on tax revenue, but if you look at the numbers, what's really gone out of whack is not so much the income, it's our expenses. Our expenses are increasing at a much higher rate than our income. Great DVD, and we will be having a link in the show notes for you to order that. I think what we're going to do is we're going to buy some, and then we'll have a link where you can get it for free, but you will need to pay shipping and handling. But it should be under $10, but definitely worth $10 and 45 minutes of your time to learn about the tax train.
Absolutely. These two guys are going to be great podcasts. I'm excited.
Before we move on to the next rule, which is my favorite rule, one of the many advantages of storing wealth inside a life insurance policy is, I like to say, that it's protected from creditors, predators, and senators. So open a little giggle at that. But with Willie Sutton's law, it's important that wherever you have money, somebody is going to go after it. And I know we talk a lot about taxes, but also every state has at least some level of asset protection of the cash value, meaning you put the money inside your policy and you get sued, whether it's from a business transaction, maybe a tenant on a rental property, or maybe you're from a car accident. Many states actually have it so 100%. Okay, 100% of your cash value will be protected if you were to get sued.
Love it. Good point. Good point. Thanks for sharing that, Anthony. I'm being sincere. I was being honest. All right, now let's move on. Now we've got, let's go move along with Nelson here let's go to page 31 where he's talking about the golden rule. And I think just about everybody understands the golden rule. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes all the rules. How does that apply to kind of what we're talking about here, Anthony?
This is my favorite rule. Okay. Because it's kind of funny because I always ask people, do you know the golden rule? Well, you should treat others like you should treat yourself. Definitely true, right? But we're using it in a different context. Whoever has the gold makes the rule. Where I like to use this, well, I've used this with my kids.
Ooh, okay.
Right? So I don't know about your kids, but sometimes my kids want they want money.
Oh, my kids never do.
Well, not they want money, they want my money.
Yeah.
And then with no strings attached.
They want handouts.
Yeah. So I kind of tell them, it's a golden rule. It's funny when you explain it to them the first time, right? He who has the gold has the rules. If I'm going to help finance your college, I did one rule I had, which my daughter hates: no tattoos.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And we could go in, but our deal is no tattoo until you finish your education and you're 25.
Okay.
My hope is by the time you're 25, you're like, man, tattoos really are not that cool. But at least when you're 25, I think you're more mature than when you're like 20.
Yeah.
To be able to make such a permanent decision. But that's the golden rule. You want my gold, you have to follow. You have to follow the rules.
When I think of the golden rule, I always think about buying a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because most people don't have enough cash to buy houses. And so that process typically looks like somebody going to a bank and applying for a loan, and they will give you their rule book, right? It's about 6 to 8 inches thick, and you've got to sign 150 times, or I don't even know how many, as you go through that. But they're stating all the rules that you must play by to have access to their money, right? That is the position that I want to be in, right? In my life, is I don't like giving up control. And so that's the example that I usually share with clients when we're talking about the golden rule. The other, we kind of touched on this too, is the idea of economic value added. Is capital has a cost, right? And so when someone it doesn't matter if it's your money or my money, there's a cost to capital. And so these things kind of work in conjunction with, who's got the gold makes all the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what a friend of mine, Patrick, stated this way when talking about banks, is that banks are like your neighbor who will loan you an umbrella when it's sunny out. And then first drop of rain, there's a knock on your door. Hey, buddy, hey, neighbor, that umbrella that I loaned you? Well, you know what? I need it back, right? Banks do the same way with their rule book. You have to be very careful. I'm not saying that you should never borrow money. Like, I've used it, particularly ideally to buy assets. But you just have to know going in that if you're using their gold, you're going to you have to follow their rules.
Once we've amassed, or once we've kind of collected a pile of gold, right? Money, what will typically happen is you will start to see, right? Your mindset changes. You will start to identify opportunities that you didn't see before. There's a name for this, and I forget it. I knew it at one point, but I got to go look it up. But it's very similar to like when you buy a new car, right? You drive.
Yeah.
Right? You drive I won't even say it because it's a very nice car, but you drive a nice car, go buy a new car. Let's say you buy a Ford Mustang, and the couple of weeks prior, you never saw a Ford Mustang. The day you drive it off the lot and you're driving home, you see 14 Ford Mustangs go by, and you're like, where'd all these cars come from?
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing with money. Is when you're in a position of cash, opportunities will present themselves.
Totally agree. And I'm going to add something to it. And what I like to say is the bigger the opportunity, the smaller the window of time for you to take advantage of it. That's why it's important to have some liquidity. So when that big opportunity comes, you have the cash to take advantage of it.
We've been talking a lot lately with hard money lenders and kind of scenarios. We have clients that have kind of reached out and are looking for that money. But the golden rule, right, is very prevalent in that scenario. Is you got somebody that's looking for money, and typically they're not looking for what's called institutional money, which is very cheap, but it can be very onerous to go and get. they're looking for private money, which on the other hand can be very expensive. And what you typically see in that scenario is somebody comes and you'll make an introduction, right? And you'll say, hey, this guy is a hard money lender. He's got some cash that he wants to loan out and you need some cash. So let's make the introduction. And then somebody calls back and they go like, he wanted how much for that money? Like, bro, he's got all the money. He makes the rules, right? That's what the going rate is for money today. And so it's always funny, just that dialogue when people get started looking at that industry. So what else we got in here?
So the next is the arrival syndrome.
Well, real quick, let me back up. Is the arrival. And this is really good because on page 32, Nelson's got a couple things in here, but he talks about what I wrote down was, I'm trying to look for the paragraph, but the idea or the thought that I had when I was reading page 32 is the idea between self-sufficiency and self-reliance, right?
Expand on that.
Yeah, so there's a big difference, and I have it in my notes, and what I've got here is what's the difference, and then I've got some notes written down. Self-sufficiency is being able to, or being in the position to provide for your own needs, as opposed to kind of self-reliance. Reliance is the ability to provide for yourself and others, bringing others up and along with you. And so whenever I hear self-sufficiency, is I don't want to live a life of sufficiency, of just being able to take care of myself. Is I want to create wealth that brings other people along with that and help other people out. So I got to look back on the sentence on which is in there, but I wanted to make sure I shared that with the listeners. It's a big difference between those two wordings, and it's subtle, but it's got a profound meaning for me. Now we may proceed.
So the arrival syndrome, to me, this one I found has been the biggest obstacle for someone to be open to the infinite banking concept.
Very true.
And to make it real short, the arrival syndrome is, hey, I already know everything. There isn't anything else to learn. A prime example for this is when I first heard about IBC. I wanted to share it with a friend of mine who was a CFO and also a CPA. The CPAs are very difficult. A lot of CPAs are suffering from the arrival syndrome. This one, he was trying to conquer it, but he couldn't. He read the book. We spent numerous meetings. This might be a surprise, Karen, but he created some spreadsheets to analyze the numbers. And you want to know what he told me at the end? He said, I can't tell you that this won't work, but I can't tell you that it does. And diving into them, and I actually, when I first heard about this, I went to other traditional financial planners, and they would always tell me this doesn't work. But fortunately, I probably had the arrival syndrome in 2008, but I think 2008 really kind of cured me of the arrival syndrome. And fortunately, I was open to learn some other ideas. And this thing, if you think you already know everything, man, there's so much more knowledge out there. Whether it's, just forget about IBC, but just whether it is with technology or different ways to do business or better ways to raise your kids or to treat with the environment or to take advantage of tax strategies, if you have those blinders on and are not willing to learn new things, it's going to be very difficult to be successful.
I agree. One of the things I wrote down was we have a podcast interview coming up with a gentleman named Alexander Felice. He has cut out a very good niche for himself in real estate. But man, I love talking to that guy and people like him because he is a voracious reader. He reads books upon books upon books, and it's just amazing. I love having conversations with people that value learning and never stop, right? That continued education piece. I love that, and that's kind of what's drawn me to this whole industry of infinite banking. Is a lot of people in this industry are like that. They have that thirst for knowledge.
Agreed. Anything more on the arrival syndrome?
Let's see here. Last note I got out for the arrival syndrome is this is our hardest job, is to get people to think bigger and better. And when people do kind of take our ideas and our strategies, is we're trying to get them to expand their mind, as they have an idea of what they want to do when we start. But you kind of mentioned a minute ago is we have no idea what the future is going to look like for us. Mm-hmm. And getting ourselves in a position of cash allows us to act on those opportunities. And we just don't know what they are right now, right? Mm-hmm. So last thing I'll add there. Yeah, and the last one that we're going to talk about is use it or lose it. This is on page 35. And this whole idea of use it or lose it, when I read this piece, it reminds me of a book that I've read, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite. You guys, if you're listening to this, write this down. This is a book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and it's called Anti-Fragile. But the idea behind this, his book kind of ties into this, is that use it or lose it, which means that, so let me start over, is that the premise behind Anti-Fragile is that everyone understands what fragile and fragility means. Is if you have an object that you put under stress and pressure, it will crack and it'll break. Everyone believes that the opposite of that is resilience. So if you have an object and you put it under stress and pressure, that it will withstand that pressure. The opposite of fragility is going to be anti-fragile. And what that means is that this object needs that pressure or that stress to get bigger and better. An example that he talks about in his book is he talks about churches that have been around for 500 years, and they're just getting better because they're made of rock and stone, and they're just settling in on themselves, and they're not going anywhere, right? Another example is the human body, or most human bodies, right? Is if I go and I work out through conditioning, is I'm going to get bigger and stronger. And it's the same thing with this situation or this strategy, is that if we have policies in place and we're using them, they get better. And it's a very difficult concept for most people to get or to grasp early on, is because we're not used to it, right? We're used to things that if we use them a lot, is they wear down and they break, right? If you think of other insurance products, is you don't want to use it. You don't want to use your car insurance because the prices are going to go up, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a very difficult concept. But when I read this, it's use it or lose it. And I look forward to kind of the next portion of this book, is because we're going to show you through numbers, right, that the more you use this strategy, the better it gets.
Right. Good segue. Because one thing that Nelson had talked about, well, a couple of things. One is that in this section, it's not about interest rates. Everybody focus on, well, what's the rate of return on this? What's the return on this policy, or what's the return on this investment? Or as you'd mentioned, a hard money lender, they're focusing on the rates of return. But until I can pay for food and medical care with rates of return, I'm going to focus on dollars. Dollars is what's going to put food on the table. Dollars are what's going to allow me to live the lifestyle that I want to do. Nobody has control about interest rates. And when we use this policy, interest rates and even the performance of the insurance company is not nearly as important of how you use it. I think that's where he's talking about use it or lose it. You have that cash value there that is just ready and liquid. And if you use that to invest, or you use that to pay off debt, and then you take that cash flow that created or freed up and paid back, you're going to use the velocity of money, and your policy and your wealth is going to grow. And one thing, a good line that Nelson had said, I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. Anytime you can cut out the payment of interest to others and direct that same market rate of interest to an entity that you own and control, which is subject to minimal taxation, because the insurance companies do pay tax, but then you have improved your situation. And that's what Nelson talks a lot about, is redirecting interest that you were paying to others. But I know that there's some listeners out there who's like, well, I pay everything in cash. I never use credit. What we have created is we like to say that we do the math, and we're going to create a quick little video that's going to explain how much cash you can have by financing things just using the savings account. or even if you pay yourself interest. Maybe you're like, man, that sounds cool, but I don't need a life insurance policy. I'm just going to pay myself interest using somebody else's bank. Well, we're going to do a video on that will do the math, showing you that, because at the bottom line, it's not about rates. It's about how much dollars you're going to have in your pocket at the end of the day. So we'll put that in the show notes, and that's also a precursor to, I believe, the next chapter when Nelson is talking about ways to finance cars, either using the CD method like somebody else's bank or creating your own banking system. The important thing that at the end of the day, it's about which product or solution is going to help you have more cash at the end of the day.
Awesome. Great. So thanks, guys, for listening. Again, if you've got any questions on anything that you've heard today, go ahead and check out the show notes where we've got links to book a 15-minute meeting with Anthony or myself. And hope you enjoyed it.
Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. Also, check out our website, infinitewealthconsultants.com, to find our podcast along with other additional resources.